Hey, everybody, this is Andrew Smith, also known as Teacher on the Radio, and I'm trying something new today as a special occasion. And the occasion is, first of all, Mayday, which is a holiday that's on this Sunday. And on Friday, the 29th of April, I'm pre-recording on Facebook Live and on YouTube Live an interview with Casey Neill from the Pacific Northwest. And this is going to air live on WTTU 88.5 FM in Cookeville, Tennessee on Saturday, April 30th, May Eve. So we're going to take a career spanning glimpse with a focus on the 1990s at the career of Casey Neill. And why am I obsessed with this? And why have I been nagging him for the last couple of years to re-release more of his old 90s music? I was a kind of a hippie punk activist living in the Midtown neighborhood of Detroit, Michigan. And Casey came through with a speaker, and they were rabble rousers. It was kind of a barnstorming road show. And he had a little cassette called Paw Prints, and it was activist anthems for the eco-anarchist scene of the early 1990s, Earth First, and all that. And he's maintained a career in independent music for going on 30 years. We're both in our early 50s now, and we're going to do the thing that 50-year-olds like to do, which is get into some nostalgia of what it was like and why we have to keep thinking about and singing about, in your case, the topics that preoccupied us in the 1990s. So welcome to Teacher on the Radio, Casey Neill.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you just tell me a little bit about how you got your start in songwriting? And I think pretty much we're actually going to play on this show a song that's like a traditional song that's sung by one of your friends. But most of the songs that folks are going to be hearing in between these chats are going to be songs that you wrote yourself. They're not going to be you singing Pete Seeger or you singing Jerry Garcia. You see Jerry back here behind me. I've got Jerry and Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lennon's over there too. So why don't you just give us your origin story as a singer-songwriter, and just walk me right into how that factored in with the Earth First tree hugger environmental defense movement of the 1990s, and then maybe even we'll spin that into that EP you released in 2020 that looks back at that. So let's go. And I want to do less talking. So far, all I've done is talking. You haven't talked at all. So everybody, Casey Neill is going to tell us a little story about his career in music. And this is hopefully going to inspire people to go on Bandcamp, which is the best place to go to support independent artists, not those other streaming services that we all use, but go to his Bandcamp page. And there's lots of different ways that you can support him by buying music. And he's going to be back touring again, finally, after the COVID thing. So check his website for tour dates. And I'll say all that at the end of the show as well. But once again, a very special live webcast with Casey Neill. This is also a pre-recording for Teacher on the Radio number 418 for May Eve 2022. Welcome to Teacher on the Radio, Casey.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's funny. I've been doing some writing, kind of preparing to put some written memories up on like a Substack or something going forward. So all this stuff's actually some of it is pretty fresh in my mind. And one of the things, I was in Olympia, Washington. I was a student at the Evergreen State College. I had been playing guitar, most of my life, and trying to write some songs. Didn't really think I could sing, but tried to anyway. And there was a place on campus called the Corner Cafe, and it was sort of the community center of these things. I'm sure they still exist on college campuses all over, except this was, I guess you couldn't smoke in the corner, but a lot of them, I ended up playing at a lot of places like it around the country over the years in the 90s. And many of them were choked with cigarette smoke. But it was a workers' collective cafe, veggie and vegan food. It was kind of the community center for everything going on at Evergreen in Olympia in 1989, which was all kinds of stuff. But there were folk musicians there. There's a guy named Timothy Hull, who I just wandered into the corner one day and saw him playing, and he was amazing. and we ended up becoming really good friends, and he introduced me to a lot of music and a lot of people. And I'd been sort of, trying to find my way and hadn't found it. And then met this community of people, and it was the great Seattle songwriter Jim Page would come down and play the corner. A band called Citizens Band that were longtime Olympia community members who ran the Olympia Food Co-op or were collective members there, and had this great irreverent band called Citizens Band. They're just fantastic. A woman named Katya Chorover, who I ended up touring with a lot over the years, and Timothy, who I still play music with over to this day, and Dana Lyons, who was very involved in Earth First specifically. And I started to, get involved in some of the stuff that was going on, some of the activism, and then being really inspired by all of their music and writing songs. And I started going to, Earth First gatherings and stuff like that. And you'd play around the campfire. And then I was encouraged to do that at events and protests and things like that. And then got asked on a road show or two, just small road shows at the time where they were sort of important to environmentalist culture. They traveled all over the country, and lots of singer-songwriters who were involved in the movement were involved in it, but there'd be speakers and people speaking about various issues and all kinds of stuff. So I did one with Daryl Cherney that was 6 or 7 shows, I think, in the Northwest, and I did some shows with Dana, and I just sort of got looped into this thing. And then at the time there was a campus organization that was national called the Student Environmental Action Coalition, and SEEK had offices at college campuses, that were run by students, and they were given budgets for events. And so that's how I started touring. Really, was I started to get asked to play on college campuses as part of for SEEK events. And in the 90s, one of the things, I'm not sure how much this is the case now. I know in a lot of places I used to play, there are no budgets for this sort of thing anymore, but there used to be all kinds of live music on campuses, and students would organize it, and there'd be pretty decent pay for the musicians. And so it would get me to town. And then I would sort of start to do like more traditional music industry side, club touring, punk venues, folk venues, whatever, after that. So that's what kind of got me out of the Northwest and into touring around the country doing it.
Muted. Fun fact. Yes, I'm unmuted now. Fun fact about this. I just read a post by a mutual, David Rovix, talking about doing gigs on college campuses that were sponsored by SEAC, SEAC. There was, and when I got here in 2001 to Cookeville, and this is a Teacher on the Radio, and it's pre-recorded live stream to be part of Teacher on the Radio number 418, which will broadcast on Saturday, April the 30th on 88.5 FM down at the left hand of the dial, WTTU. We have a chapter of SEEK at Tennessee Tech in 2001 that did so much good activism. And then it folded around the time that National SEEK apparently folded within the last few years. And because our Constitution was still on file here at the university, we actually rebooted a couple years ago our campus SEEK. I don't know if there are any other remnants of SEEK, but that's how the funding formula I used to bring you failed. That's how I get you to Tech. SEEK has a different, they have different money streams that they can tap into. So maybe I'll still get you to Cookeville through SEEK, and then it'll be like a flashback to when you played colleges back in the day. I think you played the 404 Willis though in Detroit. You didn't play at the campus, but a lot of us were college students at the time. Do you recall? I think you played at the 404. We had a little storefront kind of.
Yeah, it was a memorable day actually. We were on this road show, and it was at the tail end of it. We'd been out, I think, for about a month, and it was one of the first road shows that I had organized myself, sort of booked it myself. And my friend Katya Chorover, who I mentioned before, was on the first leg of it, and then she went home, and an activist from Vermont named Matt Jacobson, who was going by the name Buck Young at the time, came out on the road with us to do like kind of a rabble-rousing speech thing. And my friend Lenny was traveling with me the whole way, and we were pulled over coming into Detroit and just shaken down by cops for a really long time. But we weren't letting them search the van. And Lenny at the time had like dreads down to his waist, but he was straight edge. And so he's like coming from straight edge culture. And I'm just like, trying to like, and I'm trying to explain to these cops that like, okay, it's going to just take, we have to get to a gig. This is going to take hours. We have a PA system in here. Like, we don't have anything. This is where we live, and we just sort of held fast for about an hour and a half on the highway side. And then they let us go, and then we drove in and we did the show. So, and I kind of remember telling the story on stage, and it was like, yeah, like, you showed up or whatever. It's like, I don't know. We just said, no, you can't search the van over and over. But yeah, I mean, that night I ended up coming back to Trumbleplex, maybe in the next year or a couple of years later. Ended up out here in the Northwest, and some I'm still in touch with, and so it's just that night was sort of like a lot of nights, and I'm trying to focus on this in the writing project I have coming up, is like how you could just walk into a room and you'd meet some people and it would lead you down some path elsewhere. And it isn't that doesn't happen now, but it's just that if people want to connect with each other, you can connect with the whole world in the way we are doing now, online. But there was just such this random factor to, like we met then, and here we are 30 years later talking on doing this interview. And it's like, it's really these sort of watershed moments that happen just because you meet someone. I mean, the first writing thing I'm doing is talking about walking in the corner and meeting Timothy, and so much of what happened in just what was maybe, my first 5 to 10 shows is still, it's people and perspective and subject matter that's still with me to this day, and never, it just sort of laid the groundwork for everything going forward, even though that has taken all kinds of veers and jags along the way. But so yeah, I very much remember that first night at 404. I can picture the room.
So you probably, and you and I have talked about this over Messenger for the last several years, have some integrity issues around, or authenticity issues around, the journey, because I think your contemporary music with the Norway Rats, and you've also collaborated with some pretty important people in the Pacific Northwest music scene, has gone, I think we talked about this, there was an Irish music thing that you were into for a while, traditional Irish music thing, and then, but it's gone towards a more, I would say Heartland's indie rock kind of Americana vibe almost, with some of the more contemporary things, maybe for people who don't know your work, adjacent to Wilco's, Springsteen, REM even, and stuff like this. But at the time, I thought this through, and I don't think I've ever really said it quite the way I want to say it now. But in the aughts, there was this whole scene of traveling kids that would have instruments and that kind of had the look of punk and the look of also homeless and, will work for food, but they had a banjo and a fiddle player and they had somebody singing. And so there's this whole huge now today folk punk genre. And there's several bands that play the folk punk genre. There's a festival here near Cookeville that I've never been to called Muddy Roots that takes hardcore punk, rockabilly, and folk punk and kind of mushes it all together into some kind of, drunken, stew in the middle of a field in Cookeville, Tennessee. But I don't think we were calling it folk punk at the time. But as I think back on your kind of, your hit singles, if you will, your iconic songs, like Riffraff, like Mayday, which are, going to conclude this episode. I think you were, and then there's the whole Riffraff album, really the kind of Anger in Motion vibe. You were kind of spinning these folk punk, proto folk punk anthems, did you think of it? And then the one of the albums I'm going to be playing from today is a live album from San Francisco that you were opening for Jello Biafra. So did you think of yourself like, or does this subgenre label stuff mean nothing? I mean, is this just a distraction, or is that a, like, I mean, I don't know, like, are like, could you go open for Flogging Molly tomorrow because of what I'm saying? Like, do you understand what I'm saying, Casey? Like,
Oh, yeah,
like,
yeah.
did you identify when those bands started coming out in the zeros? Did you notice that was kind of what you were doing? Because I think you kind of invented that, or made it more because of the piece with anarchism and environmental justice, because those things were all kind of woven in there. Did you know at the time that, and I look at, you know, how many streams you have on Spotify, and I'm not expecting that my interview is going to give you 1,000 more, but I'd like to give you maybe 50 more or 100 more. You know, I'd like to lead a few people down the rabbit hole with you.
I mean, I think, you know, one of the things, yeah, I mean, I totally noticed that. And I did a show with Mischief Brew, who Eric is sadly not with us anymore, but what an amazing musician. And this was sometime in the early 2000s, and Positive Force promoted a show in DC then it was me and Mischief Brew. And he played first, Eric played first solo, and he like covered a bit of one of my songs. He talked about how he had heard Riffraff, and you know, being on the East Coast, he hadn't heard things like this, and hadn't had things that had, you know, just felt like, oh, here's a kindred spirit on the other coast. And so that was cool to hear. I mean, I very much identified it with it simply because that's what I was listening to. I mean, I weirdly missed a lot of music in the 90s that was, you know, like things I actually love now, like Britpop and things like that, just were not on my radar because, you know, in the Northwest we had our own thing, and it was grunge or whatever, but also like all these different angles of that, and there were acoustic musicians working in that context. You know, Elliott Smith was in Heat Miser, but then did this stunning solo work, as the whole world knows. And my friend Bonfire Madigan and Jen Wood had a band called Tattletale that were kind of in the stew of Riot Girl music, but it was cello and acoustic guitar and harmonies, and they were so good, and we did a lot of shows together. And so I definitely felt part of something that I did not feel at home in, you know, the very kind of buttoned up folk music world that existed, that was largely based on kind of I don't really separate songs into like, this is a political song, this is a personal song. One of the things I've tried to do my whole career is kind of, there's a lot of gray area in there. I think there is anyway, but I you know, I have songs that will be very personal, but kind of go into broader issues, and vice versa. But there was a lot of politics in the beginning days of indie rock too. And so all that was really inspiring to me. And then, but the folk music world, there were certainly people that inspired me. While the folk revival music wasn't a lot of what I identified with, I did love a lot of the people involved, and a lot of the obviously what they stood for. And then, you know, traditional Irish music and Scottish music, there are people like Dick Gaughan, who was sort of a really incredible inspiration, and others that were, you know, in the folk music world, but just, you know, kind of tough. And really the person that should be talked about, and actually isn't talked about enough, I think, in this context, is Ani DeFranco. Because I remember seeing her, it was first time at a place called And the Weathered Wall in Seattle. It was $5 to go in to see her play. And here's this girl who's like just beating the living crap out of her guitar and singing about all this badass stuff. It was so electric and so good. And clearly it come from kind of the more kind of urban alternative side of East Coast songwriting, the sort of the Suzanne Vegas of the world and things like that, but then married to punk sounds. And then also her guitar style was really kind of in the vein of what Michael Hedges had been doing with alternative tunings and having these massive sound. And it was just so great. And that was a huge part of the picture at the time, like what she meant and means to people. But especially, it's like we're having this conversation based on you seeing me in this like really nascent part of my career that I'm like, oh, okay, like, didn't really have it yet. And I'm sure she would say the same thing about the exact time period I'm talking about. Like, I just love that stuff. And so anyway, I don't know if that answered your question, but
so we're at WTTU 88.5 FM, Teacher on the Radio.
Andrew, I can't hear you right now. Let's see.
Yes, I'm talking. Yeah. So This is a pre-recorded interview with Casey Neill. It's actually broadcasting live on Facebook. I don't think we have a huge audience. So this is April the 29th, pre-recorded for Saturday, April the 30th, May Eve. We're celebrating Mayday on Sunday. Casey Neill is one of the few true holiday songs for Mayday that I know. And this is, we're talking about the 1990s. So anyway, check him out at caseyneill.bandcamp.com and at caseyneill.com. And he even admitted that we feel maybe a little bit awkward about our 20s, and we feel a little bit awkward about the 90s. And he's had a whole 22-year career in this century, and he's still producing new music, releasing stuff on Bandcamp. He has an album, a vinyl album he put out a couple of years ago. He has a band that he tours with around the Pacific Northwest, and hopefully we'll be doing either a solo or a band tour in the east side of the Mississippi in 2022. Casey Neill is our guest on Teacher on the Radio. And I think why I'm obsessed with this time in the 90s goes back to something that you said about your music in particular. I'm obsessed with this time period for a lot of other reasons too, but with your music in particular. And you mentioned about seeing and hearing Ani at the time, and then having to go back later, much later, to discover a lot of that music from that period that you weren't even aware of at the time. So when I left Detroit, I moved to rural Tennessee, and we bought a bunch of land. And I was basically, I had a couple of kind of jobby jobs, and then I became a graduate student in literature, and then I became an adjunct instructor. But during my late 90s, it was like grad school stipend and a commune and like a little kid, And so I couldn't, and this was before, not even before Spotify. This is before Napster. I mean, this is before, downloading a song on dial-up to listen to later on your iPod or whatever. So the music that I had was the music that I physically owned. And so I wore out all of your records. And I don't even remember how I heard about the Manchester Rambler Double Dutch album. I don't even remember how I heard about that coming out, but it somehow had something to do with Pete Seeger. And I was like, oh, Casey's been discovered. Now he's going to be huge. And then the end of the century, the same year I graduated with my master's degree to become an English teacher in college, which is what I've done to pay my bills ever since. You came out with the Casey Neill Trio, and you actually played that whole album just recently live on a streaming service that you did some of your lockdown concerts in. But both of those albums, while you were moving away from the kind of almost like proto folk punk anthems of the cassette and then the CD, the Riffraff CD, you actually were really connecting with the land, and all the songs were about something to do with the land. I mean, I think not every single song, but also with hobos and traveler culture, and so I don't know. I just feel like you were tapped into something that not very many other people were tapped into, and because those were the only records I owned. I mean, I had a few other things obviously that I listened to, but I didn't have that many things that I owned. I know all those songs so well that whenever I hear them, it brings out something in me. But maybe, so I don't forget to ask this, like, let's talk about some of these like iconic songs off of those three, Riffraff, the Double Dutch record, and the Scree record. Did you set out to write, an anthem? I mean, did you know that a band would steal your lyric and become, exponentially more popular than you are by stealing a line from your song to make the name of their band? Let's talk about Riffraff for a minute. That song in particular, did you know, like, that? I mean, I don't know how many people know that, but it's got to be one of your more well-known songs. I posted that I was going to be talking to you on my Facebook, and the former Sikh advisor from Tennessee Tech posted "Hooray for the Riffraff." So, I was just like, "Whoa!"
Yeah. I mean, I knew when I wrote that I had something. I mean, it's funny because it's a list song. It's like I had a chorus, and I knew it was, it had that thing where it would like appeal to the way it was written, and it was very much the things I was, I mean, I talk about all these other things that were in my musical world, but really it's like where traditional music and punk met was what I was really interested in, especially at that time. So it was like, things like the Pogues and Uncle Tupelo, where it's like, okay, these people have listened to Minor Threat and they've listened to, the Bothy Band or Bill Monroe. And so Riffraff was just sat right there. And I mean, and it did the thing. I mean, you mentioned the band Hooray for the Riffraff, and that, to me, that is like, it's like the ultimate compliment. First of all, because they're bloody amazing. Like if they were a bad jam band or something, I'd be pissed, but they're like really good. Alinda is just amazing talent, and she but she never heard the song. She heard the phrase from her aunt in Humboldt, and that's where she heard the song later, after she'd already named her band. So, and to me, that is like, there's something about that that's like, okay, well, you write a song and you hope the song has a life. I mean, songs automatically kind of have a life, or a death potentially, away from you. Like you put it out there in the world, and then the culture does whatever it's going to do with it, ignore it, elevate it, and make it a hit, or most often some place in between all that. And so, but folk music is like, here's this thing that, the song a band got essentially, named after this phrase, but the phrase, she wouldn't know the phrase was mine. And I mean, that's what, and also, claim to that is like, I put hooray in front of Riffraff with for the in between. It's catchy. It's not a terrible beauty is born or some like incredible thing. And so it's just like, but like, I was really proud of the song. I was proud of, the way it came together, just sort of representing all these elements of underground culture at that time that still exist today, kind of all, and some of them existed hundreds and hundreds of years before that, all kind of wedged together in this like anarchic stew. I thought it was, I play it to this day often. And so the fact that the phrase gets out there in the world, like that's what Pete Seeger talked about the folk process about. I mean, we, as somebody who, and while my own music was steered towards Irish music and Scottish music and a little bit of bluegrass influence too for a while in the early 2000s, late 90s with those records with Scree and Portland West, the live one specifically, that music is still a part of my life. I have a duo with an accordion player from Dublin, Johnny Connolly. I play a lot of Irish music in my life. And I play songs that were written by somebody. They evolved over time, and you just never know who that is. And that's the beauty of it. And to have any song that taps into that specific well of sort of human folk culture that is away from, completely has nothing to do with the music industry, just nothing to do with it. And that is so beautiful to me. And so it's kind of the ultimate compliment, but but she didn't even mean to do it. It's like, she just was like, her aunt said this thing to her, and it's a really cool phrase. And that's what she named her band, because how she felt. So it's just a win all the way around.
There are other songs in that genre, or within the genre, that have tapped that. But for you to be able to, within a couple of years, to put out Riffraff, Mayday, Dancing on the Ruins of Multinational Corporations. I mean, these are all songs that I think, were defining, and we've kind of danced around it, but we haven't really gone there. And when we talked on the phone briefly the other day, setting up all the details for today, I wanted to go there, and we didn't. You were about to say something really profound, and I cut you off about what we're up against today being even worse than what we were up against then, but somehow maybe not. We don't have that because you and I aren't in our 20s. I don't know. There was some sense that we were on the cusp of cutting off the apocalypse at the pass and taking, instead of turning this way to go to apocalypse or Armageddon or just global ecocide and catastrophe, that we were going to go to socialist anarchist utopia with with bells on, with bells and whistles on. So anyway, folks, by the way, you're listening to a pre-recorded edition of the Teacher on the Radio program that's also being live cast on Facebook Live and YouTube Live on Friday, the 29th of April. It's going to be broadcast specifically on purpose on May Eve, on Mayday Eve, so I can play Casey's song on May Eve about Mayday. And I'm Teacher on the Radio, and my guest, also Andrew Smith. My guest is Casey Neill. He's dialed in from the Pacific Northwest. He's got several albums that you can support him by getting from his Bandcamp page at just type Casey Neill Bandcamp into whatever search Google you use. And this makes me think of the EP and the song that's kind of like an epic, kind of a Bob Dylan epic type storytelling song about the 90s, the distance ahead, distance back, distance ahead.
The distance ahead, yeah.
Yeah. So let's go there and get topical for a second. I think we've done a really good job, and we're only going to be doing this, I don't know, for not that much longer. But anyway, I think we did a really good job of talking about the milieu of the scene that you come out of and that you belong to, and that does include, Ani DeFranco and Pete Seeger and Ewan McCall and Jello Biafra and some of those other people we mentioned. But what about those things that preoccupy us as sentient humans living under the mega machine and consumer capitalism, and just the mad rush off the cliff that our world is taking, and writing songs to maybe say, let's not drive it off the cliff. You don't strike me as an you don't strike me as an accelerationist who just wants to bring it all down anyway, so we can all go live under a rock in a cave. Maybe but so talk to me about that topic, that song that I don't know how this is all going to work out, where I play these songs based on where we talk about them in this interview, but I'll splice this interview together with that playlist I sent you. But looking back from 2022 on I don't know, Redwood Summer, or even the Battle of Seattle, and all those and also those people that were doing some of those earth defense type actions out there in the deserts and the forests of the West. Why that topic, and what in the world should we do about it today?
Well, the reason I wrote that song is, well, one is because we were on lockdown and I had time to write a lot of songs. I hadn't written songs in 3 or 4 years because I had just been working so consistently, like sort of from 2017, 2018, 2019. I did a road show called the Earth to Trump Roadshow of Resistance that was put together, that was really modeled after the old road shows, and was put together by a national environmental group called the Center for Biological Diversity, and really it became an indigenous roadshow. So that sort of tapped me back into some of the stuff. There's the book, The Overstory, that was a massive cultural thing that did it win the Pulitzer? It won big awards and was amazing. And essentially, The Overstory tells the story of all these different people that come together in various ways and gravitate towards the same things, which were ancient forest defense, mostly in the West Coast, and all their trials and tribulations. And, it's very based on reality. I mean, I think a lot of people read this as fiction, which it is. Richard Powers wrote historical fiction essentially about my friends, and I remember reading it, and my wife was like, I was reading it, and she'd look over, I'd just be crying, and she was like, "What is going on?" I was like, "This is just so beautiful and amazing." And then the next night, I'd like toss the book down and be like, "This is crap." That isn't how it happened at all. But I think what I was going to say to you on the phone the other day is that, I think there was an element of, the sort of fun. There's a great sort of comedic, mischievous element to the environmental movement, and it played out, and also the beautiful parts of it being the creative end of it. I mean, that's always the part that I gravitated towards, the Art and Revolution organization, and all these things that led to, that made banners for the WTO protests and all these things, and just I'm kind of bouncing around here, but there isn't a lot. I guess my point is there isn't a lot of record of this. There's not a lot of online. It was sort of, in the 50s and 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, everything was sort of documented, and this is true of the music too. And then by the 90s, there was so much underground culture, and especially in music, that just, everyone knows 10 or 15 bands that meant the world to them, that might have packed halls for a little while and put out a couple of cassettes or early CDs, and then have just disappeared, and you can't maybe find some blurry video of them online, and anyway, I kind of lost my thread. Oh yeah, just that the mischievous part of Earth First and other environmental groups, organizations that were doing this sort of work was, there was an element that felt like, exaggeration isn't the right word, because we knew then the situation was really dire. I mean, obviously the state of deforestation globally was grim in the 80s, and it was really grim in the 90s, and it's desperate now. And but there was an element of kind of like, playing with the industrial collapse thing and being like, oh yeah, okay, like, I don't know, but an element of just kind of like, okay, we're pushing it a little further, A, to have some fun with it, B, for impact, move the goalposts, make the Sierra Club look better, whatever it is, get more done. But it turns out, like, not only were we not exaggerating at all, not only was the radical environmental movement of the 90s completely right, it wasn't right enough. Like, we, I don't think, accounting for the exponential nature of global warming and climate crisis is well, we know where we are now. So, and in terms of what we do, I cling to hope. I don't know why sometimes, but I do. And I think one of the main things is, and I don't want to get too much into this kind of stuff, but it's just like, one of the main things is the presence of one's physical body. Like, here we are talking about this stuff online, and everyone's kind of shouting from the sidelines online about whatever issue it is. But as we saw in the summer of 2020, the power of people's physical bodies getting out in the streets and doing stuff, that makes change, and it makes change en masse. And I think it's it's what we need to get back to. And I'm kind of surprised there isn't a more mobilized just mass movement around climate, and there is, but it should be, we're talking about basic survival of where we live, of the rock we live on, and it should be so much more to just so that we don't drive off the cliff, which is
So
I was bouncing around there.
So tomorrow, don't drive off the cliff. Tomorrow, don't If there's a rally in your community, maybe go to that rally or go to a potluck or go to a bonfire. But it is May Day, and May Day is the historic holiday of international workers. We started celebrating it in North America because of the Haymarket martyrs in the late 19th century. And it is also one of the 8 sacred holidays in the Celtic wheel of the year, and people who participate in earth spirituality are very much celebrating the end of winter and the beginning of the light half of the year. It starts with spring equinox, but by May Day, everything's in bloom. We have, I don't know where you live, if you have wildflowers, but all of our wildflowers are just going crazy in Tennessee right now. And maybe, I hope the next time I see you won't be through a video screen on your device and my device. So everyone, we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank Casey Neill from the Pacific Northwest for joining us today. And you have been listening to an interview pre-recorded for a broadcast of Teacher on the Radio, which does air on 88.5 FM WTTU in Cookeville, Tennessee. And we are trying to save our radio studio. Yesterday, Casey, there was a spontaneous protest on my campus of students at the threat of a possible move of the radio station to a less ideal location on campus. And so I support all of my student colleagues who allow me to be here. It's a student-run station, and so they're just letting a teacher into the booth since 2007. My guest today, again, has been Casey Neill. Casey, why don't you tell us, I tried to say it right, but tell everybody the different places online that they can find you and to find your music.
Well, as you mentioned, Bandcamp is really great. So it's, just search for my name at Bandcamp, Casey Neill, Neill. And then CaseyNeill.com also is, where I'm playing shows and has links to all the things I'm up to. And those are the 2 best places. But of course, every other place that music is consumed, some, if not all of my music is in all those places too. And then also, actually the real ideal thing is to go to your local independent record store, and if they don't have the title, they can certainly order it for you. And those places are heroically soldiering through the modern world as well. And I just like the soul of the independent record store is one of the most important things in my life. And not just as an artist, but as a music listener and music lover, and those places are just it's church essentially, and to see them struggle is really rough. So anyway, that's the best way. Go find your local record store and ask them to order my records.
And I double checked. It is Casey Neill, CASEY, Neill with 2 L's. It's NEILL.bandcamp.com. And this is the last official Teacher on the Radio for the spring semester of 2022, because we're on summer break in a few days here at Tennessee Tech. So good luck on all your finals if you're a student who happened to stumble across this broadcast, and check out Casey's music. And Casey, I hope the next time I see you is at one of your gigs, and I will be following those tour dates. I'm even willing to travel a day's drive to see you. So maybe I'll see you later in the summer or fall. And I'm going to click the off button. And if you stay on for just one quick second, and then everyone else have a great May Day. Celebrate May Day tomorrow with everything you've got. And we need it. We need people celebrating this
Thanks,
time.
Andrew.